Good morning. Today we're going to discuss Chinua Achebe's Dead Man's Path. A little bit about the author. Achebe is a very famous world over, well-known author. He's a Nigerian author, and he is very invested in discussing not just the colonial problems created in Nigeria by the colonizing powers, but also the nationalists, the problems with the nationalists in, in kind of like suppressing their own people for their own interests. Now, one of the things that to keep in mind about Nigeria is that it is populated by, it's a very big country, and it is populated by lots of different tribes within Nigeria. It gained its independence from the colonizing British in 1963. However, soon afterwards, the country was put into a civil war between the Igbo and the Biafra people, which went on for a long time. It was a very bloody war. A lot of people died during it. Later on, the Igbos were successful in reuniting forcefully in Nigeria, and of course that itself tells you the national story of how certain tribes are marginalized, and this is just two of them. There are of course a lot of other tribes as well. Now this story is very interesting because it is a story that discusses modernity. It is a story that condemns and criticizes modernist colonial practices, and it also condemns the idea of these self-serving truths that people construct. So one of the things that the colonizers, of course, brought to Nigeria was Christianity, the religion itself. The Christian religion with its rituals and its practices and everything. One of the things that post-colonialism teaches us is to understand and respect that every single religion comes with its own rituals, comes with its own practices and its own belief systems. And each religion's practices might seem very odd to another religion. Doesn't mean that this because a religion is not part of, let's say, Christianity, it automatically means it is in some way lesser than the others. Now, the Igbo religion that existed for the Igbo people and was based on ancestors, was based on multiple gods. It had a lot of pagan beliefs, and what Achebe in this story is doing is he's trying to make us think about those things and respect those religious entities and not to disregard them in the will to, critique a system that you don't agree with anymore. So he is talking about the religious zeal that certain educators or people who grew up in a in an environment where they learned through mission schools and became Christians, and how they would treat their own people, not because they were necessarily evil or not because they were necessarily bad, but because of this new zeal of modernizing this population, of civilizing. So now remember we talked about the civilization zeal, the zeal to civilize people that existed in the colonizers and the missionaries who were there. This has been transported to the people who were then trained in their image, and this was carried on. Now this is a story of Michael Obi, a young headmaster who is sent to a mission school, who decides to use this opportunity to make a name for himself, but also to change the whole system of the school, to make its standards up to the mark, so that when the white colonizing administrators come, they can see a really good report of the school. Now this particular school, what he does is he decides to raise the standards, was also beautify the compound in which the school exists. Now the school of course was made later on. The people's religious and their sentiments and their the Igbo religion with ancestors, with their burial ground, with their ancestral paths existed beforehand, and the school was made on to those areas. So basically the path which is referred to here as Dead Man's Path passed through the school itself. Now Michael Obi, as the name suggests, a westernized Nigerian, or I wouldn't call him a Nigerian because the story is in the independence times, written during that time. He sees an old woman basically crossing one day and decides that the path needs to be closed, leading to his own ruin at the end of the story. So I'm going to read a few lines that I found very important and pertinent. So the first is in the first paragraph of the story, where he says it is about Michael Obi. He was outspoken in the condemnation of the narrow views of the older and often less educated ones. Now, keep in mind that this less education, older views, all of these are things linked with the native populations and their beliefs, while the colonizers' views, the Christianizing views, and are thought to be modern and pertinent and correct, which is of course very problematic, because does that mean that somebody else's religion, somebody else's thoughts now are going to completely control the system that is present within a certain geographical locale, just because that is the system that is imposed by the colonizers? But that is that shows his mindset, and that shows his belief system in that particular system. So let's move on to the second page. It is the description of the school, that Mr. Obi put his whole life into the work, and his wife hers too. He had two aims. A high standard of teaching was insisted upon, and the school compound was to be turned into a place of beauty. Now, again, the standards of beauty, I would like to point out, are again very, very colonial, of how flowers and bushes are supposed to be organized, how things are supposed to go. The native ideas of beauty and aesthetics are completely relegated to another rank here. So there's a mention of the dead man's path. And then he inquires of a teacher about why there are villagers who are moving through the compound, and the teacher responds, the path appears to be very important to them. Although it is hardly used, it connects the village shrine with their place of burial. So it basically is very important to the people of that place. And those are the people, or their children are the people, that this person, Michael Obi, this headmaster, wants to educate in that school. Yet at the same time, he is very insensitive to their beliefs, their ideas, their rituals. And so this particular idea is being explored here by the author. So let's move on. So what he does is he closes the path, and then the village priest comes over, and he talks to him, and he tells him that, look, and I'm going to read it out because it's very interesting. Look here, my son. This path was here before you were born, and before your father was born. The whole life of this village depends on it. Our dead relatives depart by it, and the ancestors visit us by it. But the most important, it is the path of children coming in to be born. So they have their own beliefs that if this path is closed, they wouldn't be able to have safe deliveries of children who are new. Now, I mean, this... Again, I would ask you all to think about this not from the perspective of Eurocentric, not from a Eurocentric viewpoint. Think about a lot of things that are present in your religions as well that would seem very odd or very strange to people outside. That is the whole point that Achebe is trying to draw your attention to. That just because you say that your religion is the religion that is, practiced by the group that is in the position of power or in position of controlling the world, that doesn't mean that other religions' rituals are old or outdated or outmoded in any way. So this is what he's trying to draw attention to. They have this very, very deep importance. So he's basically critiquing this lack of farsightedness on part of Michael Obi and people like him, who in their zeal to modernize, completely disrespect the cultural norms that are already present in a place. So Michael Obi listened, but he tells him that we are doing this, blocking this path precisely for the sake of making sure that these outmoded ideas are not propagated further. The priest leaves, then there's a child who is being born, and the child dies, and because of that the village people think this is happening because the path has been closed, and so they revolt, they destroy the closures of the path, they destroy the school buildings too, and when the administrator comes, he writes a very bad report for Michael Obi, and he talks about this tribal war that is going on. Which tells you two things. Which tells you, one, that following modern systems or the idea of modernity, that is colonial modernity, blindly without any idea or thought for your own people is very problematic, because it doesn't just affect them, it affects the people who you are supposed to be educating as well. But it affects their loyalties, the loyalties of the colonial regime are not going to be with you either. So Michael Obi is penalized from both sides, from the side of the people, his own people, and from the colonial administrative side as well. So it's basically a story in which Achebe is criticizing this new idea of progressive zeal, but not progressive for the sake of progress, but more progressive for the sake of following the paradigm of the colonial powers. I hope you enjoyed the story. I will discuss the next story with you soon. Till then, have a wonderful day.